Antioxidants are critical because some polymers are susceptible to oxidation. You expose it to heat, they are attacked by oxygen, so it becomes yellowing. Particularly if you see polyamide, they are highly susceptible to this. So when they are exposed to heat, they will become yellow. The properties will also come down. So what you do is you add an antioxidant. What the antioxidants will do, they will go attach themselves to the N groups so that they protect the N group from being attacked by the oxygen. That's all. So these additives really gives the performance. And now the question will come, how will you understand whether after adding a heat stabilizer or antioxidant, the desired property has come or not? There are methods, like if you want to do the heat stability, you subject the plastic specimens to higher temperature and then test it for the mechanical properties. What is the drop in the property? The base resin, you will see a big drop after exposing to a particular temperature, maybe 100, 120 or 140, depending upon the plastic. But you will find after incorporating heat stabilizer, the properties do not drop the same way as the base resin. So that is a differentiator. Similarly, when you have added antioxidant, you will clearly find the part which you are made do not suffer from degradation. The color do not turn yellow. These are the way you really understand the efficacy of the additives added. Then another important category is the UV and light stabilizer. See, today, most of the plastic parts get exposed to the sunlight. Sunlight is dangerous in that the UV light, it has got a very bad effect on the parts in degrading the plastics. Plastics are susceptible. So you expose any plastic part to the sunlight, you will find after some time they break like appalam. It will simply break. So any plastic which is exposed to sun should have the resistance against the UV. So here, lot of hindered amine light stabilizers are available, commercially available. When you get into the industry, you will be able to know which are all the available, commercially available additives. So these additives give a protection to them. They absorb the UV light and give it back in another wave, another frequency, thereby protecting the plastic from the effect of the UV. That's all. So you see car has got a lot of plastic parts on the outside, like mainly the bumper. Bumpers were once made in metal. Today, almost all the cars bumpers are made in plastic only. All these bumpers are made of polypropylene today with impact modification as well as UV stabilizers. UV stabilizers and light stabilizers also. Here again, the how you will check whether it has got sufficient UV stabilizer to withstand this effect is you have got testing equipments like weatherometers. In weatherometer, you expose it to UV light, you expose it to conditions like rain or daylight, and then over time, after exposure to UV light, you test what is the drop in property. Like radioactive material, you have a half-life period. In plastic also, we talk of half-life period. What is the time it takes for the plastics to drop off of its property, say tensile strength or flexural strength or impact. So that determines the use of the plastic or the life of the plastics in use. Then you have impact modifier. It enhances the ability of the plastic to absorb the impact energy. What happens when a car travels on the road? The road is not good. You've got a lot of stones on the road. There is every probability the stone will fly and hit the bumper on any part. When the stone hits a running vehicle, the effect is multifold. Please remember, it is not just a small stone hitting the car. The car is traveling at 60 to 70 kilometers per hour. So the effect of the stone hitting the vehicle is accelerated. It is bound to break the part. So what you do? A mere polypropylene will not withstand that impact, will not absorb the energy. So you add impact modifier. Again, they are elastomers, polyolefin elastomers, and there are different kinds are available. They are added to a percentage of something like 5 to 20%, depending upon what impact you require. They give sufficient ability to the plastic to absorb the impact. So almost most of the plastics that are used in day-to-day life have some impact modifier incorporated, and the type of impact modifier used varies from plastic to plastic. Now come the other additives, which are too many. I have listed only some of them. You need a lubricant, you need plasticizer. A lubricant is, why a lubricant? See, you find in many places where there are difficulty in metal parts opening, like lock in the houses, people add a little drop of oil. Similarly, any moving part, you put a grease or some oil. What is it that does? It reduces the friction and facilitate movement of the part. Same thing is applying to plastic also. In plastics, you have got molecules. So if you lubricate the molecules inside the plastic can flow freely. Similarly, a plastic goes through in different plastics processing equipment where the molten plastics comes into contact with metal. So there is a friction. If the friction is there, the plastic is bound to stay inside the barrel and may degrade. So you need some lubricant to lubricate the molten plastics to move forward in the processing equipment. So you add a lubricant. The lubricant that you are adding to lubricate between the molecule is called internal lubricant. And the lubricant which you add to lubricate between metal surface and plastic is called external lubricant, like stearate, zinc stearate, magnesium stearate. These are all good examples of external lubricant. Dioctyl adipate and many oils are good examples of internal lubricant. Okay. Plasticizer are another. Plasticizer basically reduces the TG of the plastic. So they become more pliable, they become soft. There are many applications where you want to make the base resin softer. So you would add a plasticizer to do that. PVC is a very good example where plasticizers are used in abundance because basically as a resin, PVC is very, very rigid. When initially PVC was discovered, you could have noticed it was done in 19th century, but the commercial use started only in 20th century. The reason is people were not able to process a rigid PVC. It will immediately degrade. Catalytic reaction will happen. So quickly it will degrade and it will char. So people were not able to use. Then the addition of plasticizers, lubricants and all made it possible to make use of PVC. So plasticizer is very, very critical for PVC. You have got the tin stabilizers are also going into that along with that. The dioctyl adipate is a good example again. Then the next additive is a colorant. You want to give colors to plastics, so you need to add a colorant. Again, dyes and pigments. Okay, pigments are the same dyes which are insolubilized. Mainly, again, they come into inorganic and organic. They have varying levels of resistance to temperature. Dyes have got lower resistance to temperature. So primarily they are used in plastics which undergo lesser temperature. Whereas if you use engineering plastics, you need to go for pigment which can withstand higher temperature. So cadmium pigments are very good example, but cadmiums are slowly going out of fashion because of the toxicity effect. There are other inorganic pigments or organic pigments which are being discovered these days, which can withstand higher temperature. The other major classification of additive is a flame retardant. Some plastics like PPS are inherently flame retardant. You don't need to add any external flame retardant, PVC also for that matter, because the limiting oxygen index, the oxygen required to keep it burning is very high. Okay, just to give you an insight, the atmospheric oxygen content is 22 to 23%. If any plastic which has a limiting oxygen index of less than that would easily burn because the oxygen present in the air can support combustion. But any plastic whose limiting oxygen index is more than 23%, they cannot continue to burn in room because oxygen present in room cannot support the combustion. So those are inherently flame retardant. But majority of plastics have lesser than 23% limiting oxygen index. They need an external flame retardant. Antimony trioxide, these decabromos are very, very famous flame retardant. But over time, again, the halogens are being banned slowly. So Newer phosphate-based, magnesium-based flame retardants are now in use. So these flame retardants make the plastics resist the fire. What happens is that it is not that they will continuously be resisting fire. There are a lot of testing methods evolved, like Underwriters Laboratories has come up with UL standards. Okay, you expose the plastic to fire for a particular time, say 30 seconds. Then you withdraw. You expect the plastics to extinguish on its own. Then you call it a flame retardant. Again, there are ratings like UL, V1, V2, V0, depending upon how much time it takes to extinguish. Any plastic that extinguishes immediately come into the category of V0 or 5V, which are considered very good. So these flame retardants are an important class of additives. So you find flame retardant resins, flame retardant compounds made in almost all plastics today. Then the scratch additives are some of the latest requirement. You know, the scratch additives are in use only in the last 10 to 15 years. Among all these additives which I have listed here, the scratch additives and gloss suppressants are the latest. What is a scratch additive?
Hello.
You, you must have heard of mar resistance also. This is the ability of the plastics to withstand scratches when your nails come into contact or it undergoes some abrasion. Okay. So you see the car door handles are made of plastic today. So what happens when you hold your hand and open a door handle? Many people have the habit of having a little nail protruding on their fingers. So this nail come into plastic, you feel scratch mark on the surface. You also see the car inside a dashboard. You will see a lot of scratch mark happening. Any appliances you take, mixie in the house or anything, when you keep handling it, somewhere or the other, the scratch mark will become visible and people will look, it is ugly. It is not giving a good aesthetics look. So the manufacturers wants to make it free from such scratch. Initially, they wanted to get rid of by having a good surface finish, giving some texture on the surface, but it helped only a little. Then the scratch additives came. Scratch additives are basically nanoparticles, very small particles. So that fills up the surface of the plastic part very uniformly so that when your fingers or any scratching substance comes into contact, it does not create a visible scratch. The depth of scratch is getting limited. That's how it assures you a nice surface. So these are some of the latest ones. Again, within the 10-15 years of life, it has seen first generation additive, second generation additive, third generation additive. When I say first generation, second generation, it means drastic differences in properties are noticed. When first these scratch additives were used, they were low volatile compounds, which mean at a particular temperature, they start bleeding out of the material. You use the word bleeding in this technology. Bleeding means the additives come out of the surface of the plastics and evaporate. So the intended performance of the additive is not fully fulfilled. You know, the car is parked in the hot sun many places, but what happens inside, the sun heat keeps on increasing the heat of the cabin inside, correct? So the dashboard, which are made of plastic, it also gets heated up. When it gets heated up over time, the additives which are present inside come out because of the heat and evaporate. So the first generation additive suffered from that. It created a sticky surface. You over time you found the surface become not good to look at. So the next generation additives came, which are high volatile, which are low volatile, which means it will not come out. It will not be evaporate at low temperatures. Those additives fulfill the requirement. Then you also would find that many times when you get into a car, you get a plasticky smell. Many people will say when you get into the car, you have the smell of plastics. Actually, these smell come from the scratch additive, which are of first generation, and also from various adhesives which are used inside the car. So what is required is an additive which does not evaporate at low temperature. Be it the adhesives used inside or the additives used, they should not be evaporating. That is what is very, very important. Okay, it should be low volatile. The other is a slip additive. Slip additive helps you. You have a film and all. You take one film, the other, it should keep coming it. You add it, so it helps you. The anti-static agent is another important category. See, the plastic is a poor conductor of electricity. It is one way it is good. It protects you against electric shock. There are negative effects also. The static current builds on the plastic surface. So when you suddenly touch a plastic, whatever built current, it comes out and you get a mild shock. Particularly if you see plastic like polypropylene or nylon crystalline plastics, you pour all this plastic into a plastic bin. Plastic bin will not be able to conduct electricity, so a static current will build up. When somebody touches it, you will get a shock. It will be mild, but it is very much perceptible. So what can be done? This whatever static current that is building up into the part must be dissipated. You have a lot of electronic components used these days. You take your laptop, you take any item today, you have got electronic components. These electronic components are all using different kinds of plastics. What if these plastics build up static current? What will happen is the static current, when it gets discharged, will destroy the performance of the electronic component itself. So that is where these anti-static agents are required. Particularly the films which are used for packing these electronic components have an anti-static agent. What they do is they dissipate the current as it formed. Actually, these are additive which migrate to the surface of the plastic and they form a fine coating on the surface which is conductive. Normally, if you measure the resistance, surface resistivity, or the surface resistivity, when you measure, you will get a value of 10 to the power of 14. Okay, the volume resistivity will be a little higher. Okay, when you add this anti-static agent, it will drop to a level of 10 to the power of 18. Sorry, 10 to the power of 8. And when it drops further, when it drops to something like 10 to the power of 4, then you call it a conductive plastic. A good example is carbon.
Hello, sir.
Yeah. Yes.
I am Vignesh from final year, sir.
Yes. Yeah. Tell me, Vignesh.
I would like to ask some doubts. Uh, so,
Yeah.
sir, how much these fillers affect that property of pure polymer, sir, that virgin polymer?
You will
So, in
see.
case
You
we
will
are,
see.
if we having that,
You
yeah,
you will see this in the presentation. Okay. Huh? No
okay,
problem. You will
okay,
see.
sir.
I have slides to tell you what is the difference. Okay. Don't
Okay,
worry. Okay. So these anti-static agents help you to dissipate the thing. So again, anti-static agent, because they form a film on the surface, they can also evaporate over time. So they have a specific life period. Then the next comes the gloss enhancer and suppressants. Both are there. Both are opposite phenomena. You see a good mixie or some any household item, you want a shiny surface. So that's where the gloss enhancers come. They give you a very good feeling when you look at the surface, shiny surface. The other side is a suppressant. See, inside your house or any place you go, any shining surface is okay. But what when you are driving, sitting inside a car? If your dashboard inside the car is very shiny, what will happen? When you are driving, when light falls on that, it could reflect from that shining plastic component and hit your eyes. Momentarily, you will have a blinding, correct? Which means for a brief time, your eyes gets closed. You lose track of what is happening in front of your car. So many of these plastic parts coming on the dashboard should not have glass. So what do you do? If you have ABS is basically because of the acryl nitrile present, you get a very good glass on the surface. So what will happen if you have to use it? It is required inside the part. For that matter, even polypropylene. So you add some glass suppressants which make it less glassy. So it will also prevent it from reflecting the light. That is safer for the passenger. Then the last category I am talking is a filler and reinforcing agent. They form a very good percentage. Something like 10 to 60% of the plastic formulation contain fillers and reinforcing agent based on the end use. So that is a large category. Apart from this additive, there are other additive also, which I am not touching right now. So let me get into the fillers and reinforcing agents. So what is the role of a filler and reinforcing agent? So you have again variety of fillers and reinforcing agent. First part you say mineral filler. They are talc, chalk, calcium carbonate, wollastonite, red sand. All these are mineral fillers. What it happens is it gives you higher heat distortion temperature, so higher service temperature. It also enhances the paintability in some plastic. If you take nylon 6 or nylon 6/6, a plain nylon 6 or 6/6, very difficult to paint. If you paint at it, it will peel off because there is not sufficient adhesion between the polymer substrate and the paint. In such cases, you add a mineral like talc. Talc goes and offers surface which likes the paint surface. So the adhesion between paint and polymer substrate will improve when talc is added in a nylon matrix. So mineral fillers are a major constituent. The bumpers normally use a mineral also. Another biggest addition of mineral is it will also bring down the cost. When you have 100% polymer, take for example nylon. Today nylon 6/6 is 400 to 500 rupees per kilo, whereas filler of like wollastonite, which is used in nylon, is 60 to 70 rupees. So if you substitute 10% of the polymer, it brings down the cost. Of course, there will be changes in properties. Depending upon the application, the user can decide how much filler content is permissible for a compound. Red sand is basically used in PVC, particularly in China, where they have an abundance of red sand. So people thought how red sand, which is very easily just go like மணல் நம்ம ஊர்ல எப்படி ஆத்துல எடுத்துட்டு எல்லாரும் ஃப்ரீயா யூஸ் பண்றாங்களோ அது மாதிரி அங்க ரெட் சாண்ட் எடுத்து பிவிசில போட்டு மிக்ஸ் பண்ணிடுவாங்க. But the red sand which they use, they cannot simply take it from the ground and use it. They have to reduce the particle size, make it uniform, then they add it. So it is not a viable alternative for other countries. The other category is glass beads. Again, in glass beads, solid beads and hollow beads. Glass bead is nothing but glass powder. Okay, you take glass, you powder it, you get a glass powder, that is glass beads. Okay, so again in this you have a solid bead, which are solid powder. Hollow beads have a vacuum inside, that is very hollow. So depending upon the performance, depending upon the component, it gives different strength. Hollow beads are the latest technology. They are not fully commercialized. They are in their infancy. So right now the cost is very high. They give you very good thickness to performance ratio. I will come to that in the later part. Okay. So again, they also give you higher thermal properties. Isotropic shrinkage. Isotropic shrinkage is in any plastic part when you are subjecting to processing, especially injection molding, you have a flow direction and across direction. I hope the students can understand flow direction and across direction. You have a flat compound, okay? So you are injecting from one side. So material flows from one end to the other end. That is flow direction. The other direction is across that. The property of plastic varies from melt direction and other direction, which is not good for many of the application. When you add something like glass bead, it gives you isotropic shrinkage. The shrinkage in melt direction and the across direction, which is normally different in regular plastic, it will be even if glass beads are added, solid beads. So you will have a same shrinkage. It is easy to measure the shrinkage also, and your performance can be predicted well in advance. The other major fiber is glass fiber. Glass fiber again has got long and short fiber. They give you massive improvement in tensile and flexural properties. They give you higher HDT and service temperature. See, normal nylon 6 has a service temperature of around 70 degrees. You continuously expose it to 70 degrees. Over time, the properties will drop. But when you add 30% of glass fiber, the service temperature will jump to 120. Whereas for the same 30% glass fiber, the heat distortion temperature will be close to its melting point. In the case of the nylon 66, which is 265, it is very easy to see an HDT of 245 or 250. You will not see the denting. Service temperature is continuous exposure. HDT is applied where momentary exposure to heat is discussed. A continuous service is where you switch on when TV. As long as TV is on, there will be heat inside. So there you have to talk of service temperature. You look at a car under the hood, under the bonnet, the radiator, everything is there. So as long as the car is running, it will keep on radiating heat. So you require a good service temperature. So the glass fiber, both long and short, offers that. It gives you a better hardness, increased density, and a lower shrinkage also. Then we'll see specialty reinforcements. You will not see many commercialized one here. Of course, carbon fiber you would have heard. Boron fiber and basalt fiber are very, very rare. They give you excellent property. A basalt fiber is actually made from rock. This basalt is a mineral which is available mainly in Russia. So they powder it and melt it at a very high temperature, something at around 1500 degrees centigrade, and make it into a fiber, which gives you exceptional property. You can see the word excellent strength to weight ratio, strength to thickness ratio. This is very critical when you use carbon fiber or boron fiber or basalt fiber. For a very low thickness, you will have an exceptional performance. For a lower weight compared to metal, it will be able to withstand a good load, very good thermal performance, and controlled coefficient of thermal expansion. You all know every material has got coefficient of thermal expansion. You see metal, when it is exposed to heat, it expands. That's why you see the railway tracks are laid. You see always a gap between two tracks. Why? Because in summer, when the temperature goes up, the track length also grows. If you put one track next to another very closely, they will collide and it will distort. That's why they leave a gap between two tracks to take care of the coefficient of thermal expansion. Okay. Same thing applies to plastic also. Plastic, when it gets heated, it also expands. When you cool, it immediately contracts. So there will be differences in the way the dimensions are measured. You consider a rocket which is coming back from space. A lot of plastic, particularly carbon fiber, is used. Why carbon fiber is used in space rocketry? Carbon fiber has a negative coefficient of thermal expansion. When you heat, it actually shrinks. It doesn't expand. Whereas a plastic expands when it is heated. Reverse. So a particular percentage of carbon fiber added to a thermoplastic will give you zero coefficient of thermal expansion, which means when it gets heated during re-entry, the dimensions do not change. This is very, very critical in high-end applications. Okay, so carbon fiber is very useful there. Of course, boron fiber, basalt fiber, aramid fiber, these are also very frequently used. They are commercialized, but today out of reach of common man. They are used only in high-end applications. You can see the picture of glass fiber, carbon fiber, and the basalt fiber there. Then, of course, you have natural fibers which are of plant origin, jute fiber, sawdust, etc. They give a all-round mechanical property improvement, good thermal property, again control coefficient of thermal expansion and all. You see here the role of glass fiber, because majority of filling is done with the glass fiber. So when we say glass fiber, we don't call glass fiber filled plastic. We say glass fiber reinforced plastic. When we talk of a mineral, we say mineral filled plastic or mineral filled polypropylene, mineral filled nylon. But when glass is used, we say glass fiber reinforced nylon. It reinforces. Like in concrete, you have a steel structure, glass fiber acts as a structural reinforcement within a polymer matrix. You can see fiber, a short fiber means the length will be 3 mm, whereas a long fiber you use as much as 12 mm. Okay, of course, when it is processed, the fiber length gets cut, but the properties are determined based on how much glass fiber length is there in the end component. A normal short fiber can have something like 300 Armstrong to 500, okay, whereas a long glass fiber can give a length 3 to 4 times higher. So that increases the mechanical property. So in overall effect, when you add a glass fiber, the specific gravity will go up because glass specific gravity is higher than that of the plastic. So when depending upon the percentage, specific gravity will go. A plain nylon will have 1.14 density. When you fill it with 30% glass fiber, it will go to 1.36. Tensile strength will go up. Flexural properties do go up. Hardness increases. Heat deflection temperature and service temperature increases. Shrinkage comes down. This is important. Now I come to the compounding machinery side or the process part of it. The process of compounding, please, I have two diagrams here. So I'm giving you the overall picture of the compounding process flow. So we have depicted a twin screw extruder at the bottom. In twin screw extruder, you can see multiple barrel. The biggest advantage you have twin screw extruder is that it has got a multiple component fixed to each other. The barrels can be removed part by part. The screw also can be removed part by part. All of them are fitted together to form a lengthy barrel and the lengthy screw. So you have a polymer coming through a feeder. So you have to meter it a particular quantity per hour like that. So the feeder for polymer, it just gives you the right quantity of polymer. So the additives, it can be liquid or it can be powder. It is again added down the melt stream. You can see in the middle of the barrel, the additives are added. In some cases, additives are added in the chute itself, in the throat itself. Okay. So then the volatiles come out. There are two arrow lines showing. So what you do is in any additive or polymer, you have moisture, you have some volatiles also. So they will come out when they are heated in the barrel. So you also give a vacuum connection there in order to suck all the volatiles out of it. The glass fiber in the form of chopped glass fiber is all, or mineral is added to another feeder down the melt stream. So you look at that, in the middle of that, you see the polymer gets added. As the polymer travels through the screw, it gets melted. When it is in molten stage, you add these chopped glass fiber and all, so that it mixes properly with the polymer. Then it comes out as a strand and gets quenched in the cooling water. You just keep water there. Then after that, it comes out of the water bath. So the strand will carry sand on the wire madri varum avlavadhaan. So water will carry over that strand. So use an air blower, either a blower or a suction, so which will remove the surface water. Then it goes to a granulator, which will cut it into small granule. After that, it is getting packed. Okay. In the next one, I am showing a continuous glass fiber which is fed into the compounding process. So if you look at the earlier picture, I have showed you the picture of glass fiber here. It is all small one. The center of glass fiber, you see, it's only 3 mm or 4 mm length. But you see next to that, there is a bunch of glass fiber, which is nothing but a continuous filament. That continuous filament can also be fed to the extruder into the middle. So the extruder screw will be rotating. It will pull the glass fiber, and depending upon the ratio of the polymer and the glass fiber going into that, you decide how much glass content is there, either 15 or 20 or 30 or whatever you want. Okay. So this is the compounding process flow. You have an extruder where polymer, all additive, all the minerals, reinforcing agent, everything is used. So they are molted, they are melted, they mix very well inside the barrel, come out of the die in the form of a strand, cooled in the water, and then the longer strand is cut into smaller granules. Again, you can use a single screw extruder also. The earlier two process flow diagram I showed, they showed a twin screw extruder. When the compounding technology first started, people used only single screw extruder. Even today, it is used in the case of PVC and some of the polymers like recycling and all. In a single screw extruder, you simply see one extruder. There is a barrel on which heaters are there. So you load the material into the hopper. From the hopper, by gravity, the material flows into the screw. When the screw rotates, because of the friction between the screw and the barrel, the materials moves forward. So what facilitates the material movement from the hopper to the front end of the barrel is friction and the gravity flow. That's all. So depending upon the type of equipment you use, the type of polymer you use, or the temperature, or the screw design, you may have varying levels of movement of plastic. So what is called a surging can happen because the flow of polymer may not be uniform. So these days we do not use a single screw extruder for compounding. So 90% of equipment used today is a twin screw extruder. Okay, so there you have two extruders which are intermeshing. Two extruder will be rotating in the same direction or opposite. You have what is known as counter rotating and co-rotating. The majority of them in use are co-rotating. Both the screws would be rotating in the same direction, close to each other. When you see the two screws rotating, you can see the intermesh, which is each screw will be almost touching each other. So whatever material is falling between the screw will get carried forward positively. Whatever falls on the polymer feed zone will pass through the entire barrel uniformly. It will get melted, it will get thoroughly mixed, then comes out of the front. So you have got different sections. Another beautiful part, in the first picture, you see single screw extruder, almost uniform kind of a screw. Of course, there will be differences in the pitch, the differences in the screw depth, depending upon the feed zone or the metering zone. But in twin screw extruder, you can see there are multiple types of segments are used. There are segments which will help you to mix the polymer thoroughly. There are segments which will help you to make the flow of the polymer fast and also to retard the flow. And you also see a port for vacuum degassing, which means gas will come out of that. What does that mean? There will be an opening on the extruder at that space. So you will have a doubt. The polymer is flowing at a very high speed inside the extruder. You have a hole to allow the gas to come out. Will not the polymer also come out of that hole? Because anyway, when you add water, water tries to take the path of least resistance, correct? So when there is a hole in the middle of a barrel, material should come out, correct? But it will not come out because the screw section made there have a larger depth that makes it a zero pressure zone, which means the pressure will be zero. So material will not come out of the barrel. Only the gas will come out of it. Gas or moisture will come out of that. So this is a twin screw extruder. There are many manufacturers. Big names are Coperion from Germany, Berstaff from Germany. In India also we have a company, Steer in Bangalore. So there are many companies there. Okay, Reifenhauser is there. So depending upon the polymer, people decide which extruder suits them best. Now I talk of the feeders. So in the compounding flow, you saw feeder feeding all the raw material into the extruder. Again, there are different types of feeder. The simplest one is called volumetric feeder. In a volumetric feeder, there is a screw rotating. So you add a polymer on the hopper, the rotating screw will take the material forward and pour into the extruder. That's all. So the feed rate fully depends on the density of material. If you have to calculate how many kilos per hour it is feeding, you have to check every time. There is no electronic device which will tell you it will run at 10 kg per hour or 20 kg per hour or 100 kg per hour. Every time you have to check, because when the density of the material varies, the flow also varies. Higher denser material means more quantity of throughput, lower density means lesser. So every time you have to check. So it is prone to variation, but it is very low cost. So small time compounders will use this volumetric feeder. But bigger compounders or established compounders use what is known as gravimetric feeder. Here, they use load control to determine the weight of plastic at any given point of time on the hopper. If you see, there will be 3 load cell mounted below that hopper. So it is insulated. Any given point of time, it knows what is the weight of the polymer in that hopper. Okay, so you start that feeder. So the load cell know what is the weight available. Let us say it runs for 10 seconds. In the 10 seconds, the load cell keeps on checking what is the weight available in the hopper. So after 10 seconds, it tells the control panel, so the weight has reduced from so many kilos to so many kilos. So you can calculate what is the material fed in 10 seconds. Okay, so you want to feed a particular, say 10 kg per hour or 100 kg per hour, you can set it. So the load cell will take care of it. Control panel will give the signal to rotate at a particular speed depending upon the discharge of the material. So these are very, very accurate. They have a stepless control, but they are a very high cost because load cells are used. A typical feeder costs something like 15 lakh. One feeder will cost 15 lakhs. Whereas a volumetric feeder, you can get even for 50,000, and good quality volumetric feeder, just 2 to 3 lakhs, that's all. But a gravimetric feeder will be costlier. Minimum 15 lakhs for a good feeder. There are manufacturers, again, Catron, Coperion is there, Brabender is there. Mostly Germany and Switzerland make feeders are very good in the market. Of course, there are other feeder manufacturers also. Here, the biggest advantage is different density of material you can change without bothering. Whatever be the density, because it checks the given weight of the hopper at any point of time, you need not worry about the rate of flow of material. And again here, you can have different types of screws for the discharge. Not just screws, you have a spring also. Very, very, like if you are adding a hollow glass sphere, if you touch it, the sphere will break. Similarly, glass fiber, if you exert more pressure on a glass fiber will break. In such cases, you can use a spring instead of a screw, which will be very, very soft on the material and take care of the breakage part of it. So you have an option of different screws. So this is about the feeder type. So you can compare the last one. The picture is same. Refill hopper is there, refill device is there, metering zone. But in between, in the case of a gravimetric feeder, you see a weight sensing device. Okay, that is the load cell. Now, side feeder. During the compounding process flow, if you have noted, I told you the additives or the glass fiber are fed in the middle of the extruder after the polymer is melted, right? So how do you feed the additive or the glass fiber or the mineral? From the middle of the extruder. Again, there will be opening in the side of the extruder, which will be a zero pressure zone. So you attach the side feeder to the extruder. So one gravimetric will feed the filler into these feeders. You can see the second picture, you can see a hopper is attached to that. Okay. And in the third one, you also have a vent also incorporated. There could be some powdery additive where there will be flying of additive. The vent takes care of that. So these side feeder feeds the glass fiber or the additive mix into the extruder at a place where already molten polymer passes through. Because the place where the additives enter as a molten polymer, mixing is easier. Glass fiber is also will get mixed very easily with the polymer. So this is a side feeder. I talked about the vacuum port. So vacuum is applied to the vent to remove the volatile. It's a zero pressure zone, which is very, very critical to get quality output. You process nylon, if you take out the material without removing the volatile, you will see a very good granule. But these granule, if you take it into injection molding, you will find lot of void coming in the molded part because volatiles are still inside the polymer matrix. So a good material needs all the volatiles to be removed from the matrix of the polymer. So that's why vacuum port is given in the extruder. These vacuum ports have a problem also. Many times it gets blocked. So people have to be careful. So they will monitor. You can see a cross section of the extruder in type A, type B, type C. So one cross section where the vent port is fixed. This cross section, you will see different openings. The C type is full opening. Entire barrel surface is open. The B type, only 75% is open. Only one screw portion is see. You can see two screws rotating. Two elongated screw you can see in the diagram. In type A, very narrow portion is open. So depending upon the polymer you are processing, you choose either a narrow opening or a wider opening. And the last picture shows a picture of how a vacuum port is there. And normally a tempered glass is used to seal it so that you can always see whether it is choked or not. And there will be a pressure gauge attached to that where you can see the vacuum. So this is about the vacuum port. Then air knife. I told the material comes out of the extruder in strand form. It is quenched in water and then taken out. Since it comes out of the water, it will carry water. If you pack the material with water, again, it is going to create a problem for the injection molder. So this air knife removes the water on the surface by blowing very high pressure air or doing the suction or both. It is again an optional equipment. Many of the good compounders use this air knife to make the strand very dry. Okay. The second one you see is a blower type. It only blows the air. The first picture you see is a suction type. So the box contains a compressor and it compresses, it sucks the air. It is more effective. Then comes the granulator. The function of granulator is just to pull all the strand and cut it into small size. The strand that is coming out of the barrel is pulled through the roller in the granulator. In the second picture bottom, you see a white color roller. So this white color roller, it rolls against another roller below and pulls all the strand. The strand will be taken and fed below this, it will pull, and behind that you see a rotary cutter. The rotary cutter will cut the chip uniformly. Depending upon the speed of the roller, the cutting roller, you will have the chip size also determined. You normally use a hardened knife cutter. A tungsten carbide cutter is very good because the life will be very long. If you put a hardened knife, every month you have to change the cutter, you have to sharpen, particularly when you use something like glass reinforced nylon. Whereas if you put tungsten carbide, for 1 year without interruption, equipment can run. There is another type also called underwater pelletization. On the third picture you see, here you will not use a strand. There is no quenching. You don't take it out of the strand. This die is fixed to this cutter is fixed to the die itself. So on the die front, it will rotate at very high speed and it will keep cutting whatever material is coming out of the extruder. Okay. So in this type of underwater pelletizer, you will see granules cut into small size at the die itself. It will go to a water bath, thoroughly dried, and then go to a dryer. These are specifically used for PVC and very soft plastics, and it consumes current because at least 3-4 blowers are used and in this pelletizer. So each blower needs a motor, so electricity will be very high. So this is about granulator. This gives shape. The granules are formed here. Now, after the granules are formed, you have a vibratory sieve. Why a vibratory sieve? Vibratory sieve is nothing but சல்லடை அவ்வளவுதான். different particles நம்ம வீட்ல எப்படி பிரிக்கிறோமோ அதே மாதிரி it is required to do it in the granules also. There will be uncut, there will be larger size, there will be some powder. If powder gets mixed it, and if you mold it along with that, the powdery polymer will immediately melt and char. So it will reduce the property of the part. So you need to separate the powdery particle, uncut particle. Uncut particle will go and block the injection molding throat. So you should remove the uncut or large size. So vibratory sieve does that. So it will keep vibrating. There will be multiple meshes. So each one will have a specific size. Okay. The top portion will remove all the smaller portion like that. And the bottom most will remove the powder. So you will pack only good sized granules. Again, there are different types. I have mentioned 2-3 types photos there. This is very essential to get uniform size of chip. Then the last stage is a dryer. You are passing the strand through cooling vat. Then you are trying to remove the water from the air knife, but still material can carry some moisture because material like nylon and PBT are hygroscopic. They will absorb moisture. So some residual moisture could be there. So a compounder would like to remove that moisture before packing. So again, there are multiple types. There are simple types are those which simply circulate a hot air. So the material, the final granule will stay there for an hour before getting packed. There are also what is known as a dehumidifier. In dehumidifier dryer are very good one. They will thoroughly remove the moisture because what actually happens in your drying process? You are trying to remove the water. When you pass dry air, the granules get dried. But when it dries and the moisture comes out, so the air gets filled with water. So after some time, the efficiency of that air will not be good. In a dehumidifier, you use a desiccant. The desiccant will filter the air and remove the moisture. So once again, dry air is fed into the dryer. So these are very efficient, but again, power guzzler takes more power because multiple blowers and motors are used there. But it also gives you a good, thorough bone dry material. Some high-end compounders also use a small screw element inside to give a mixing so that thoroughly all the granules will mix, you will have a uniform. When we say I am producing a 30% glass reinforced material, not all granules will have 30%. One granule will have 30, other will have 29, other will have 31 and all. Similarly, there is going to be a little variation as the process is running. Use of gravimetric feeder actually ensure you get a better control on that, but again, it will be within plus or minus 2%. So when you have a homogenizing screw inside the dryer, it helps you to even out the spread so that when an injection molder molds it, you get almost same glass fiber content or mineral content in the end part. So these are all the equipment which are very important for the compounding. Okay, I have taken little more time to explain. I hope it's not a problem. Now I will get into the effects of the compounding. You see, the first part, I am taking an example of nylon 6. Nylon 6 glass fiber reinforcement. You see the graph, there are two bars. One bar is tensile strength, light green. The dark blue is the flexural strength. The line shows the specific gravity. So when you increase the glass fiber from unfilled to 35%, what is the change? I have depicted the property for unfilled, then 10%, 15, 30, and 35. How the tensile and flexural properties go up, how the specific gravity also goes up. So this is the effect of different percentage of glass fiber on nylon 6. The same thing you can see for nylon 6.6. Not a big difference, but in nylon 6.6, you normally go to 43. Even today, we also give 63% glass fiber in nylon 6.6. The higher the glass content, higher the specific gravity, higher will be the component weight. At the same time, you have a higher tensile strength, flexural strength, and modulus, which means rigidity will be also be higher. This is on nylon 6. So I am just tabulated in nylon 6.6 from glass fiber 0 to 50. You can look at those values. The unfilled nylon has a specific gravity of 1.13, which goes to 1.58 when 50% glass fiber is added. And you see the tensile strength from 80, it goes up 2.5 times more. It crosses 200, but elongation drops, which means the rigidity goes up. Flexural strength goes up. Look at the modulus. Modulus in gigapascal. Modulus is representative of the rigidity, how stiff it is. From 2.8 gigapascal, it has gone up by 4 times, 11.5 gigapascal in 50%. If you try to break the specimen of a 30% glass reinforced nylon 6, your hands will get a shock, the energy shock. Anybody who is doing a testing of it will understand that. So much is the energy. And look at the heat destruction temperature at 18.5 kg load. From 75 degrees centigrade for the unfill, it goes to 255 against a melting point of 265. Nylon 6.6 melts at 260 to 265, and your HDT can go up to 255, short-term duration. And in service, from 70, it will go to 120. So this is the effect of compounding using a glass fiber. This is another graph that tells you different types of a filler and what is the effect on the polymer for different properties. Okay, this is tensile strength. You can see the blue one talks about the glass fiber. Glass fiber, as the filler volume goes up, has got the maximum increase. The green one shows mineral, it is lesser. Then you have a mica, calcium carbonate, wood fiber, wollastonite, nanoclay, all these things are there. So very distinct property increase can be seen in glass fiber followed by mineral. This is for the tensile modulus. Same grade, same thing done on nylon. This is on the impact properties. You can see a very good one, calcium carbonate up to 15% filling improves the impact properties. But the moment you cross a 15%, the impact properties starts falling because till 15%, it fills all the molecular gaps, tries the polymer to transfer the energy, the impact energy, so that it is able to withstand the impact property. But after 15%, it becomes a mere filler and it causes the impact strength to drop. But with glass fiber, there is a steady increase. After 15%, you see a steady increase. So in mineral also, you will see a steady increase. Wollastonite, there is a drop after 15%. So the compounders understand these, what level of filling, which filler, which polymer. So they can fine tune a polymer compound based on the end user's requirement. This is about the HDT, glass fiber and mineral, they give the best, followed by mica. So these are all the effects of different thing. So that actually brings the end of my lecture. I think I have covered a decent requirement in compounding to understanding the basics. We saw the basic steps of plastics, disadvantages of the base resin in end use application, why the compounding is required, various additives, their purposes, the compounding process flow, the equipment essential for compounding, the effects of glass fiber reinforcement in polyamide, and the effect of various fillers with different loading in polyamide. So as I informed in the beginning itself, only the fillers load is very high. You load something like 5 to 60%, whereas all other additives like heat stabilizer, UV stabilizer, slip additive, all these things are added very small quantity, 0.2%, 0.5% like that. Lubricants maximum 0.5%. Plasticizers, depending upon the plastic, it can go to 8 or 10%. And additive like optical brightener, you add as low as 0.001. It enhances the brightness of the plastic. So you have a white color or natural color, you put a optical brightness, something like Stilbin derivative or something, it will enhance the brightness. They are added very low, 0.001. So the percentage varies, the performance varies, and you enhance the end use application. So this is what we covered. So I am now open for question and answer.
Students, if you have any doubts, you can ask.
Yes.
Yeah, sir, is there any method to our additive to improve transmissibility in transfer polymers?
Yeah, there are additives are there, clarifiers are there. Millikan makes an additive. So there were days when polypropylene was totally opaque. Okay, these
Yeah.
additives when they incorporated into polypropylene gives you contact clarity.
Okay. What are that additives, sir? Clarifiers.
They are mineral. Actually, they are mineral. They are nano mineral.
Okay.
What it helps the molecules to freeze in whatever place. Okay, so that the transparency is increased. So polypropylene is a major beneficiary of that additive.
Okay. Or shall we improve that transmissibility in polycarbonate?
Yeah, polycarbonate to an extent. As such, polycarbonate is highly transparent. You will not have any problem using a polycarbonate. You will not find any application where you require a much higher transparency in polycarbonate. As it is excellent. They don't use any special ones.
Oh, okay. But if the transmissibility decrease if we processing that material, right? Yeah, I can see a lot of material, lot of polycarbonate material with 90% transmissibility. If I want to increase that to 95%, what will I do? Like
No, polycarbonate will not be a problem. Polycarbonate will retain the transparency.
Okay. Sir.
Of course, clarifiers are available. Specialty clarifiers are there. But the commercially available polycarbonate normally are used without that. They incorporate during polymerization, something, that's all.
How much these additives and the fillers affect the virgin polymer, sir? Other properties of virgin polymer?
Yes, there will be, it will affect. Some properties will go up, some properties will come down. Like clarifier normally will not have any effect on that. But it could have an effect on the foot contact application. For example, a plastic is used in foot contact. The additives which are used should also have a foot contact approval.
Okay.
Like you are using some, today a lot of plastic utensils are coming. Okay, you make a lot of cups. You cannot use a cadmium pigment or something like that. You have to use an organic pigment or organic dyes which are food compliant. Very, very important. I have not covered those aspects actually.
Okay. But yeah, I am doing project in engineering plastics. So I just want to know the details. Also, how can we improve thermal conductivity, sir?
Thermal conductivity, you add carbon powder.
Okay.
There are metallic. There are specialty metallic powders are available. Okay.
Yes, sir. But okay. But
so
that metallic powders, drastically decrease the virgin polymer properties. So I can go with a carbon or graphite.
You have to choose what is optimum for the application.
Okay.
There are certain mineral additives are also available, which has come now. Like you have today everywhere we have a LED lights, right?
Yeah. My project is on also LED light,
and
I
LED
want to
light,
choose material.
Yeah. In LED light, you have a problem of heat. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So the PBT used there should ideally conduct the heat. Some special additives are used. They are very limited availability. Okay, but it has really done well. But if you look at that, in India, very few people use this conductive plastic tire because of the cost.
Yes.
I will tell you, in India, the economics are totally different. In many places,
Yeah.
we cut corner to keep the cost down. So all the light manufacturers, they don't use this conductive one. Very few people, that too only for their export, they do it.
Okay.
Additives are there. Additives are there.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, in this building process, we are having get some faults and all. I have seen some factories. We are getting some the pink faults and those things. So if we have these additives, if it can be in wrong proportion, it can have counter effect like that. Sir. So